Prior to December 2nd, 1954, Evansville was experiencing a normal holiday season. Temperatures hung in the low 40s, not enough to keep Evansville citizens off the streets and outside. West Siders were preparing for the annual Refrigerator Bowl, which would feature Kent State and Delaware State. Business was usual until the fateful night of December 2nd. From that point on, Evansville and the surrounding areas were a totally new scene. Fear gripped the city as a killer was on the loose and yet to be identified.
He certainly made the papers, and people had screen doors. They didn't lock anything, windows open. There was no air conditioning, and it made believers out of people.
This sense of terror would remain in Evansville and the surrounding area for the next year as the killer tore through southern Indiana, wreaking havoc and leaving many broken homes in his wake. Mary and Charles "Doc" Holland were no strangers to the holiday rush, as their liquor store on Belmead Avenue kept quite busy with the flow of revelers coming in to purchase drinks for their holiday parties. This was the case on December 2nd, when Mary was working handling the customers as they came and went. One person, however, did not come in to purchase any liquor. By the time he left the store around 11 p.m., the cash register had been robbed and Mary Holland lay dead in the store's bathroom. The local newspapers ran the story of Mrs. Holland's death the next day, citing, "Owner's wife shot to death, robbed in the liquor store on Belmead Avenue."
And the next day, my dad was reading the paper, and he said, "What time did you get in last night?" And I said, "About 11:15. He said, "Do you know what happened right around the corner? Mary Holland was murdered last night, and you were out and about."
The coming weeks saw a robbery and a double murder, but both criminals were arrested and were found to be unrelated to the murder of Mary Holland. However, as the sun set on December 22nd, the killer would strike again, and for one man, the sun would never rise again. Whitney Wesley Kerr came into work at the Standard Service Station on the corner of Fairs Avenue and Franklin Street for the night shift the night of December 22nd. Working to support his family and fulfill his dreams of building a new house and buying a car, Wesley's dreams were shattered when a young man walked into the station around 1:30 a.m. on December 23rd. The man pulled a .38 caliber gun on Kerr and forced him to open the cash register and take out all the money. The next few months brought a lot of uncertainty to Evansville residents. After 2 brutal murders in fewer than 2 weeks in December, the killing spree had come to a screeching halt. Although relieved that no murders had taken place since the night of Wesley Kerr's death, there had been no leads as to who his killer had been. The notion that a killer was residing in Evansville frightened many people. Fearing another attack, people locked their doors every time they left the house and were wary of being caught outside their homes after the sun set each evening. This was a fear that no Evansville residents had ever experienced before the murders, but were now forced to with the realization that an unnamed killer was lurking amongst them. This fear would be confirmed on March 21st, 1955, when the dubiously named Mad Dog Killer struck again in rural Posey County. As rain started to fall on a gloomy Monday morning, an unexpected visitor walked through the unlocked door of Mrs. Wilhelmina Saylor's home. Thinking that no one was home, he entered the house without caution, only to see Mrs. Saylor emerge from the bathroom. He pulled out his .38 caliber pistol and forced her to give him all of her money. After getting the money he needed, he did what he had already done twice before with Mary Holland and Wesley Kerr.
People would start putting the guns in the front room and in the kitchens. People wouldn't go after dark. They wouldn't go outside. They was just paranoid, and it was just not knowing where he was or who he was.
The last murder by the Mad Dog Killer came on March 28th. That morning, the killer forced Raymond and Gable Duncan from their home at gunpoint and drove them to a nearby slough where he killed them both. Later, he returned to the home and left Gable's wife Mamie paralyzed, his daughter Elizabeth dead, and his granddaughter Shirley Faye weeping on the bed beside her. This latest murder pushed many citizens of southern Indiana over the brink. This killer had to be found before he caused any more destruction. This plea was answered on Good Friday when a group of high school boys spotted a car that had been seen at the Duncan house during the murders. The boys wrote down the license plate number and turned it into the sheriff's office the next day. The number was traced back to Leslie Irvin of John Street in Evansville. Leslie was found working at the Yankeetown Siggyco plant and taken into custody by the police.
I was working in this building, and Les had just talked to me just a few minutes. And when he started out, there was 4 state troopers and 2 of the sheriff's deputies and the sheriff of Warwick County got up on him and jumped him and just threw him to the ground and just, he was really rough with him. And of course, Les fought because he was somebody who jumped him. And I went out there and told the sheriff, I said, hey, don't do that. What in the world are you doing to this man? And that's when he told me it was none of my business, but after they'd get him in the car, he said, I'll talk to you. So after they got him in the car and he come back up, he said, do you know who this guy is? And I said, well, yeah, it's a guy I work with. And he said, no, he's Leslie Irvin, the Mad Dog Killer.
On April 14th, an unsigned confession was released by the police detailing the murders. On May 12, 1955, Irvin, after much urging by Evansville officials, was taken to the Gibson County Jail to stand trial for the murder of Wesley Kerr. The first trial, which took place on December 10th, was filled with spectators waiting to hear the verdict on Leslie Irvin. Ted Lockyer Jr. and James Lopp, who were hired to defend Leslie, argued that he could not get a fair trial in southern Indiana because of all the publicity generated from various media sources. Despite their urgings, on January 9, 1956, Irvin was formally sentenced to die by the electric chair. On January 18th, Irvin escaped from his holding using a key made of book covers and tin foil and ran off into the snowy night.
He was said to have walked all the way from Princeton to Mount Carmel, Illinois, in a raging snowstorm, something like 13 miles. From a jailhouse that what fairly new, it had been completed in 1949, and it was considered like the very latest, safe, escape-proof. And he had already said that no jail could hold him. It was just a huge surprise the next morning when the deputy jailer came in to, check on everybody, and Leslie Irvin was gone.
Word of Irvin's escape once again paralyzed the city and the surrounding countryside. Many people went out and bought more guns, strictly for the protection from the Mad Dog Killer that was on the loose once again. Detectives scoured the country looking for any possible clues as to where Irvin might be hiding. Finally, on February 9th, Irvin was found in a pawn shop in San Francisco, California. He received national attention during his trip back to Indiana, where he was placed in the Indiana State Penitentiary to await his fate. As Lockyer and Lopp ran through the appeals processes trying to get Leslie another trial, the impending new execution date of July 9, 1957, drew ever closer. Finally, on the day that Irvin was to die, the U.S. Supreme Court granted Irvin a stay of execution. By 1960, the case was granted a hearing with the High Court, where the justices made their landmark decision, stating that the media had influenced everyone associated with the case to such an extent that Leslie Irvin could not get a fair trial. Because of this, Irvin was granted a new trial in a neutral location.
That's why it took so long when they selected the jury, because just about all of them had heard of the case and had formed opinions, and it was just really impossible to get anyone who was not familiar with the case. And that was ultimately what the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on.
The final trial, which would decide Irvin's fate, took place in Sullivan, Indiana, a place virtually void of biased opinions regarding his guilt. After hearing all of the arguments from each side, the jury, after much deliberation, reached its verdict. Leslie Irvin was found guilty for the murder of Wesley Kerr and sentenced to life in prison. The details of Irvin's life after his trial were very anticlimactic. He was content to live out his life in the Indiana State Prison until he was diagnosed with lung cancer in 1982. He died on November 9, 1983 at the age of 59 and was brought back to Evansville for private funeral services. The man who wreaked such havoc on southern Indiana had passed away, but the terror that he struck into all of the people in the area would never die.
I think it may have changed Evansville in a way, the way 9/11 changed the whole country. You know, it was sort of a loss of innocence.
Evansville was forever changed after that fateful winter, and the scars of Leslie Irvin's reign of terror will be etched in its history for many years to come.